You may have noticed that some of your clearest thoughts show up when you're doing something completely ordinary. You are washing dishes, folding clothes, driving a familiar route, pulling weeds, or working on a puzzle. Your hands are occupied, but the activity is not asking much from you. Then, without forcing it, your mind returns to something you've been carrying. Sometimes an idea connects to something you heard earlier that day. Other times the answer does not arrive, but the question begins to look a little different. Or you finally figure out what caused that uneasy feeling you had earlier. When you knew something was bothering you, but you couldn't quite put your finger on it. Researchers use the term creative incubation for this general experience. It is the idea that after you step away from a question or problem, your thinking may continue to shift while your attention is elsewhere. Now, that does not mean folding a load of laundry will solve your life. And it does not mean every walk, shower, or puzzle is going to produce some brilliant realization. It simply means that not every useful thought arrives because you sat down and demanded an answer. Sometimes your mind needs a little room. And so today, I want to talk about what may be happening in those quieter spaces and how it can support the process of remembering yourself, trying something new, and becoming more present in the life you are building. There are times when trying harder actually does help. If you're learning a skill, reading instructions, or making a decision that requires careful attention and focus. But we also have all those moments when more effort just creates more noise. You keep asking yourself the same question, you run through the same options, you replay the same conversation, and after a while, you're not really thinking anymore, you're just circling or spiraling, as they say. Stepping away can interrupt that circle. A familiar low-pressure activity gives your attention somewhere to rest without using all of it. And that is where the mind wandering can enter. Your thoughts move toward a memory, a plan, an old concern, or a connection you didn't notice when you were concentrating so hard. And there is research suggesting that this can sometimes help with creative thinking. In one well-known study, people who took a break with an undemanding activity improved more when they returned to a creative problem they had already seen. More recent research has found a more mixed picture though, which is important. The effect is possible, but it's not automatic. And it doesn't mean it's going to happen the same way or every time for everyone. And that is really all the science we need for this conversation. The point is not that your brain becomes a secret machine working out every answer behind the scenes. The useful point that loosening your attention can change the way you return to something is the value. And what comes back may not always be a solution. It may be a better question. You may realize that you're not confused about what you want and that you're worried about how someone else will respond. You may recognize that something you call laziness is actually exhaustion. You may remember an interest you pushed aside because it didn't seem practical. You may notice that the goal you keep chasing belonged to an earlier version of you. And none of those realizations fixes everything on the spot, but they can give you a more honest place to begin. And that is a part of quiet work and a large part of becoming. We tend to imagine personal growth as something dramatic, a major decision, a complete reinvention, a morning when you wake up and suddenly know exactly who you are and what you're supposed to do next. but real life is usually less theatrical. Sometimes growth begins when you remember something about yourself that got buried under responsibility. Maybe you used to write, paint, dance, build things, spend time outdoors, or study a subject simply because it fascinated you. Then life became busy, practical, or demanding, and that part of you became harder to hear. When it returns to mind, you do not have to turn it into a business, announce a new identity, or reorganize your entire life. You can simply pay attention. You can ask, why did this matter to me? Or what part of that experience am I missing now? Remembering is not the same as going backward. You're not trying to become the person you were 10 or 20 years ago. You're noticing what may still be true about you today. And from there, you can begin reclaiming something in a way that fits your life now. That might mean making one decision differently, setting a boundary, picking up an old interest, saying what you actually think instead of hoping people will guess. Letting yourself enjoy something without needing to be impressive. This is where a quiet realization becomes lived choice. And usually that choice needs practice. It is easy to have one clear moment and assume the rest will happen naturally. But understanding yourself and living as yourself are not exactly the same thing. You may decide that rest matters and then discover how uncomfortable it feels when you actually stop being productive. You may decide to be more visible and then hesitate the first time you have to share your work. You may realize that you want something different, then feel pulled toward the familiar because it's familiar. That does not mean the realization was false. It means you're moving from an idea to real life. And this is where experimenting becomes really useful. You try something small, you notice what fits, you learn what needs to change, and you stop treating every awkward beginning as proof that you made the wrong decision. Sometimes an attempt will not work. Sometimes you'll change your mind. Sometimes the version you imagine will look wonderful from a distance and feel completely wrong once you're living it. That's information. You are allowed to adjust without turning the adjustment into a proof of personal failure. Over time, the things you're learning begin to show up in your routines, relationships, and the way you make decisions. Growth becomes less about what you say you value and more about what your life begins to reflect. Then there's a part people often skip, recognizing what has already changed. If you're used to working on yourself, it is very easy to keep moving to the finish line. You reach a goal and immediately focus on the next one. You make it through a difficult season and barely pause before asking what still needs fixing. And you become so committed to progress that you forget to experience any of it. Celebration does not have to be loud. It can be as simple as admitting, I handled that differently than I would have a year ago. It can be taking the trip, enjoying the dinner, laughing with a friend, resting without earning it, or noticing that something which once controlled you no longer has the same power. And that's what matters. The point of growth is not to become a permanent improvement project. It's to become more available for your own life. So when a thought surfaces during an ordinary activity, you do not have to dismiss it because it did not arrive during a serious reflection session. You also do not have to treat it like a command. You can be curious about it. You can write it down and come back to it later. And you can ask whether it still feels true once the moment has passed. You can give it enough attention to see whether it's pointing towards something useful. If you want to try this intentionally, just keep it simple. Choose one question you've been carrying, not 5, and not the largest problem in your life. Pick something general and specific. You might ask, what have I been avoiding? What am I ready to return to? What would one honest next step look like? Then choose a familiar activity that does not require your full attention. Take a walk on a route you know, fold some clothes, get out in the garden, color, or work on a word search or some other puzzle. You do not have to repeat the question to yourself the entire time. That would turn the activity into another assignment. So let your attention move naturally. When you're finished, write down anything that stood out, a thought, a memory, a feeling, or even a different question. And if nothing comes up, that's fine too. You didn't fail the exercise. You gave yourself a few minutes without demanding an outcome, and that is useful on its own. If you would enjoy exploring this in a guided format, Front and Center Unlocking Your Main Character Energy pairs reflective prompts and theme word searches across a journey of remembering, reclaiming, expanding, and celebrating. It is simply an optional space to slow down, reflect, and see what comes forward. You can find the link in the description. Becoming is not always loud. Sometimes it looks like a thought that returns while your hands are busy, a question that changes shape after you stop pushing it, a part of yourself that becomes easier to hear once everything gets a little quieter. I would love to know what ordinary activity gives your mind the most room to wander. Is it walking, driving, gardening, showering, working on a puzzle, or something else? For me, it's walking. Tell me about yours in the comments. If you enjoyed this conversation, please like the video and subscribe to the Lula Starling Experience for more author chats about creativity, personal growth, and the life behind the work. Until next time, give yourself room to notice what comes forward without forcing every quiet moment to produce an answer.